or you are the cream of the crop in the sense that, yeah, looking out into the world, there's very few people who held that standard of virtue. And it's no surprise then that the Buddha said, with good virtue as a foundation, we have a chance to begin to look into and begin to understand our minds, our hearts, because it is the prerequisite that we have this sense of being someone who doesn't want to harm or hurt or exploit anyone in the world. One of the benefits that the Buddha said that comes from keeping sila is a sense of non-remorse. And I always liked that, because a remorse is always the one thing that it gets us in the end. And once we start getting into it, doubts will come up in the mind. And with doubts, there's agitation. And then the mind just gets flustered. So even at the point of death, it's very important that we can look back on our lives and feel good about ourselves. Don't have that sense of remorse, because then we can just say goodbye with a smile. I had this postcard once. There's a mummy they found in a cave, a skeleton, but it wasn't just a skeleton. It was actually a mummy. There was still skin on it, and it was this monk who'd sat in a cave, and it was a mummified monk sitting in full lotus in a cave, and they found this mummy. And the nice thing about it was it had this beautiful smile on it. So I made a postcard out of it, and I sent it to a few friends in those days, and I wrote on the back, I said, if you want to die in style, die in meditation with a smile. So we can die in style if we maintain a life that is really one that also the devas would approve. It's like one of the recollections that we can also do in preparation for our uh, using like a formal meditation object. And one of these meditation objects, or preliminaries, if you like, is the recollection. And these recollections of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, recollection of our generosity, recollection of our virtue. But the last one is also the recollection of the devas. Remembering that the devas will be happy when they see people practicing in accordance with the Dhamma, upholding the precepts in the world, because then they know, they're going to come up here. If they see the human beings down there messing around, not keeping any decent standard of virtue, then they get all sad, because they know, they're going to go to the asuras. And believe it or not, even in heaven, apparently they're fighting. So in the suttas, you get these stories about the devas and the asuras fighting. But of course, war in heaven is not like war in our world. It's all happening on the level of the mind. There's no corpses, as it were, in heaven. And people just fade away and just disappear. So using those kind of recollections, reflections, to get yourself into the mood for meditation, remembering all the generous acts you've committed over the years, recollecting the fact that you're trying your best to uphold a good standard of virtue, reflecting on the amazingness of the Buddha, just this being arising in the world, not really having a teacher. Well, we got it easy. We got the Buddha. He went before us. He's laid it all out for us. All we have to do is follow. We got enough faith. Remember, the Buddha said the doors of the deathless are open. May those who have faith come forth and practice. So the gates to Nibbana are still open. And 2,500 years after the Buddha's final passing away, uh, because the Dhamma doesn't really care about time, and that's why we chant it. It's 𝐏𝐴𝐴𝐿𝑖𝐼, it's timeless. People these days, they have this conceit, this arrogance, and they say, well, it's 2,500 years, what applied in those days doesn't apply these days anymore. We have to adapt, we have to be, fit things according to circumstances. And one of the things that's always good to remember is the Buddha actually said, there's, to what I have taught, there's nothing needs to be added and nothing needs to be subtracted from it. So it's like Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo. It's perfectly proclaimed. And that's the beauty of the teaching of a fully enlightened Buddha. It's perfectly proclaimed. The reason why other religions fight with one another is because their religion is not perfectly proclaimed. It's probably well proclaimed in many ways. Some of the teachings in different traditions, they come very close, but they're not the teachings of a fully enlightened Buddha. So they knew something. They had a good idea of what people should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, but it's not the same. It's not the teaching of a fully enlightened Buddha. And so we got this great fortune of having come into contact with that as human beings with reasonable health. If we look around, there's all these weird diseases cropping up, catastrophes. So the world's going down the drain pretty fast. I said in the other talk here I gave a few days ago, the world is changing very fast. It's changing even faster now. And they call it progress. But is it really? It's like they progress on the material level because they think the body is the thing that is important. But they degress on the level of the mind because they got no friggin' idea what the mind actually is. They still look for the mind as a byproduct of the brain or something like that. I mean, science is pretty hopeless like that. So I always joke, I said, well, if they could save a lot of money if they actually looked into the scriptures, because the Buddha said it 2,500 years ago. There's a lot of science in there that if they really applied it, they would probably come up with better ways of running this world instead of aspiring to things that are in the end just going to decay like everything else. They would actually look after their minds, after their hearts. And that's what we're here for today, is to spend one day where we actually squarely look at our mind without the chance of running away. So nobody is allowed during this retreat to go down and, I don't know, go to a coffee shop or watch a movie in between or something like that. You're supposed to be staying here, staying put, and yes, maybe endure your own company. In the beginning, that's what I had to do. When I started out, I was 22 years old. I was in Thailand, a country I didn't know, with all these different weird things. And okay, with 22, pretty much everything is an adventure. So admittedly, that I didn't have a problem very much. But still, when I then went back to my hut in the forest and sat there, I was alone with myself. Yeah? And so first of all, I really had to learn how to endure my own company. It wasn't always pleasant. All the stupid things the mind can come up with, it's just unbelievable. Yeah? I remember this one obsession I had. It's like, we used to travel a lot when I was a kid. And every year we would go on a really nice holiday, scuba diving, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, what have you, Yugoslavia. And I had this obsession when I was on a retreat all by myself. I wanted to know the chronological order of all these countries that I've been to since the age of 3. So I sort of I bent my mind to figure it out. And then it was 2 or 3 that I was in doubt about. And so I think it was a year or so later, I finally went back and saw my parents. And I had this hope of resolving this mystery, these 2, these 3, And I asked my parents said, I don't know, it's a long time ago. So it's like, it's amazing what the mind, the obsessions the mind can come up with. And then we dwell on it and we bathe in it. And it's like, it's good sometimes when that happens to be able to just laugh about yourself, Don't take yourself so serious. Because like I said yesterday in the talk here, what we're dealing with here is formations, conditions. Yeah? And even though, yes, technically it's our karma, or technically our vipaka is the results of our past actions, most of it anyway. But it's not really something that we can rely on. It's not really something that we should be putting first. All these conditions, all these ideas, memories, thoughts. Because the mind, when it actually turns inward, it's, it can just dwell in its own space quite peacefully, and not really be affected by these things. As the more we get involved in the world, the more we allow ourselves to get mixed up with things of the world, then because the mind is conditioned primarily, that these conditions will bear on the mind. They will linger. It's like an echo. So whatever we feed our mind, and this is food I'm talking about. Literally, the Buddha called it ahara. So we're not talking this physical food that we put into our body, but also mental food that we put into our mind. And with that mental food, what the Buddha meant is things like sense contact. So the kind of sense contact that we pursue, the sense contact that we have, that sense contact that we indulge in, that we seek, and that craving for contact, sight, sound, smells, taste, touches. That craving for contact is the food for the mind. So is cetana, our intention. It's like the intentions that we cultivate, sometimes unbeknown to ourselves, they form on a level that we don't even have enough mindfulness to see. And it's the craving for intention. It's the intention to be, the intention to create or to destroy or to be someone. It's this bhava tanha, this need to express yourself, to whatever have you. Yeah? I mean, these days it's all about profiles that you put out there on the internet. Yeah? But I mean, 80% of these profiles is just a lie, isn't it? I mean, you don't you touch up everything and you edit everything, and by the time you finally submit your profile, sometimes you kind of go, who's this person? It's not me. It's not you anymore. Because we want to present something. We want to be someone, be something. And all that is just going out into the world, and it sort of entangles us in those conditions. And most of these conditions we can't control, and that's why it's so frustrating. We try to control things that we can't control, and that's why we suffer. We want to control the people around us. Want everybody to be nice, want everybody to like us, but we can't do that. So in meditation, what we do is we recognize that, and we recognize that the things that arise in our consciousness, which is, by the way, the fourth ahara, consciousness, the craving for consciousness. Now, the difference between craving for contact and craving for consciousness, and this intention in between, these three mental kind of foods that we feed ourselves with, is that the best I could always come up with is that the craving for contact is craving for intensity. It's like you notice how sometimes we need to intensify the input because it's not good enough anymore. And that happens on any level. I've been drinking a lot of coffee the last few days, and now 2 double espresso is no longer good enough. So it's the intensity. We need more and more. And it gets coarser and coarser. It gets grosser and grosser. Yeah? And so we're actually moving away from the sublime peace, silence, and emptiness of the mind. We crave coarse sense contact. A consciousness is just a sheer variety. There's this state in deep meditation in the arupa yatana, where what they call infinity of consciousness. A consciousness is infinite. The possibility of experience in this universe, the kinds of consciousness we can experience is infinite. So if you crave that, it feeds on itself. Consciousness is one of our 5 aggregates. We have the body, feeling, perception, thoughts, consciousness. But consciousness is also one of the 4 foods. So it's like consciousness feeds consciousness, and consciousness feeds on consciousness. The more we crave the variety of experience, then the more that craving actually manifests itself. So we need to be very careful what we put into our minds, not just what we put into our body. So be careful of the amount of sense contact, the intensity of sense contact, the amount of consciousness, the amount of things. And sometimes we don't need all these things. There's a Socrates, one of the old philosophers in, I think, Greek times. He went across a marketplace with his attendant once, and he turned around and he said to his attendant, "Isn't that wonderful? All these millions of things in this marketplace that we all don't need." I love that. That's great. Because I just spent a month in Taodam in the jungle, which is literally in the middle, smack bang in the middle of one of the biggest national parks, which connects Burma and Thailand. And it's about 3 kilometers from the Burmese border. There's nothing there, thousands of kilometers, just forest. There's still elephants, tigers, leopards, all these wild animals still there. And I always love going to that place, spending a month there, because to me it always puts everything in perspective. It's like you sit there and you look out over this amazing range of mountains and you kind of think to yourself, what's really important? And then when a thought comes up, like one of these obsessive thoughts or one of these stupid thoughts or one of these memories or plans or anything really, in the face of the conditions there, the face of this atmosphere in the jungle, it just can't sustain itself because it's so ridiculous to think about something like that when you're in the middle of the jungle. You could just be eaten by a tiger anytime or something like that. It's like, what's the point thinking all these stupid thoughts? So that's why the Buddha praised life in the forest. because he knows. He said, I do not praise a monk who sits erect, and he looks really, really cool and mindful, sitting in the city, in a city temple. Because I know it's not going to take too much time. Somebody's going to knock on your door and say, come out now, you're supposed to teach a retreat or something like that. Right? But I do praise the monk who sits in the forest nodding. Because the Buddha said, sooner or later, he will straighten his back and he will actually get into samadhi. Because the conditions of the forest are more conducive and nobody's going to disturb him. And if he really practices, eventually his mind will calm down. So how do we calm this mind down? That's what we're here for today. How do we make this mind peaceful? Or let's rather say, how do we allow the mind to become peaceful? Because trying to make peace is like, they had this course, a course saying in, I think it was the 70s or something, so please excuse me, and if you edit this, then please edit it out. It's like, it was fighting for peace is like fucking for virginity. It's a contradiction in terms. So if we see this meditation as a struggle, as a fight, then it will be a struggle. And yes, of course, in the sense that because it is a battle in a way, we will experience these things, but with wisdom, the one thing that we find out with time is that we don't need to push these things away or fight these things, because pushing away and fighting is always an expression of aversion. It's always as an expression of anger. It's always an expression of an unwholesome mind state. So what I've learned over the years is the best way to deal with unskillful mind states, with silly memories that don't really have a place here and now, or plans of the future, or what have you, all the things that pertain to these famous 5 hindrances that always prevent us from being peaceful. All these things, they have a legitimacy of being here because they are conditioned. They are created, they have become, or they have come to be. It's like complaining about a meal that you've just eaten. It's already down your throat, it's already in your stomach. So what's the point of complaining about it? It's already gone. So whatever arises in consciousness right now, it's already there. So you cannot not experience it because it's already there. But what we can do at that point is withdraw our interest from it. And that's the skillful way. It's like you recognize it for what it is. It's a condition. It's a formation. It's something that has been created, has arisen because of causes, because of ahara, because of food. But it's already there. So instead of trying to push it away or develop aversion to it, what you do is you deliberately make a choice to take away your interest, and you put your interest somewhere else. That's a more peaceful way of dealing with obstacles. But it's something that you need to learn. It's a skill. So withdrawing your interest from something, because the nature of the mind is whatever you pay attention to in consciousness, that will grow. So you pay attention to beauty, it turns into lust. You pay attention to something ugly, it turns into aversion. So whatever we pay attention to, whatever we give importance, that will stay. Whether it's importance in the sense that we're trying to get rid of it, because that means you're giving it importance. And trying to get rid of it is also making it important. And trying to sustain it is making it important. But if you see it for what it is, it's just a state that has arisen because of causes. I can know this, and the very fact that I can know it means that it's not me. It's arisen because of causes. I can't control it. I can't will it away because it's arisen because of causes. It's already there. But I can recognize it and then take away my attention. Yeah? I put my attention somewhere else. I choose to put my attention somewhere else. So that's why the Buddha said one of the skillful means of getting rid of unwanted, unskillful thoughts is by replacing them with good thoughts. So in the beginning, when we find that the mind is not really capable of not thinking, some people in the world even believe that it's impossible to stop thinking because they're thinking all the time. They cannot not think. But it is possible. But in the beginning, it seems impossible. And while it still seems so far away, one of the things that we can do is we can deliberately start thinking good thoughts, kind thoughts, peaceful thoughts, thoughts of acceptance, and also thoughts of wisdom. Even the thought of recognizing a condition as a condition is a skillful thought, because that puts it in perspective. And then you can take your attention away and put it back on your meditation object. So you make your meditation object important. You make peace important. You make silence important. You make emptiness important. Whatever you make important, whatever you pay attention to, that can grow in your mind. And whatever meditation object you choose during this day or during your meditation generally, you got to make it important. You got to make it the most important thing in the world. And take away your attention from all the things that arise and try to disturb that peace. That's one thing that you can do. So it says on this form, it talks about understanding the principles of meditation. I had to come up with something to submit. So it's the best I could come up with. So what's the principle of meditation then? What are the principles of meditation? Because in this day and age, it's like everybody's trying to put out something there. You got all these meditation teachers and all these techniques and all these, wonderful whatever. And then, everybody says, this is the technique, this is the one, you got to do this one. That's really good. And then the next person comes and says, nah, that's not really it, I found this other one, which is really good, you should try this. And then you sit in meditation and you kind of start, watching your breath. And after 5 minutes, you think, yeah, maybe I should do some metta. Maybe I should do some this or some that. So the mind is sort of getting into doubt. What am I supposed to do? So as if you understand the principles of meditation, then the technique is not so important. I mean, admittedly, you got to find a technique which kind of suits your character. You got to find a meditation object that you love, that you enjoy, because it's something that you're going to be paying a lot of attention to. And so if you try to pay attention or take your attention away from unskillful things or silly thoughts or memories or whatever, fantasies, and you're trying to put it somewhere where you have no interest, in a meditation object that doesn't suit you at all, then of course that's not going to really work, is it? So you do have to find a meditation subject or meditation object or whatever you want to call it, that sort of suits your character, your temperament. But fundamentally, you got to understand that the mind, it doesn't really care. It's like you can use any object to anchor your mind in the present moment, because that's what the principle of meditation really is grounding your awareness, grounding your consciousness, grounding your mind, grounding your heart, whatever you want to call that thing which knows, in the present moment. Yeah. It's like the defilements and the hindrances that take us away from the present. They take us into the past, they take us into the future, or they fantasize, they worry, they fear, what have you. So, one of the meditation words that actually worked for me is, in the beginning, just to start off with reminding yourself, now is good, now is good, now is good, now is good, now is good. Because right now, what is there? There's very little we can do that really makes sense in the present moment, other than just being with what we have. If we project into the future, it's uncertain. We don't know. If we go back into the past, I created this poem once for my benefit. It's like something like, if I can remember it, not lingering on history, nor staking hope on fantasy, being the future, but trusting in reality, the timeless present here and now. So it's like not lingering on history. The stuff that's gone is gone. It's just dead corpses we carry around. And people who live in the past, um, what is that? You know, it's like a memory. To me, it was always, it was so boring. The idea that to remember something that was already gone. It's like, why would I remember the wonderful times I had with my girlfriend when in the end she told me she doesn't love me anymore? Something like that. It's like you're thinking of the past, you're dredging up the past, which is already gone. The good old days, the good old days. Do you remember? Yesterday we're sitting here. You remember the last retreat, the first retreat 10 years ago in the Girl Scouts camp in Camp Christine. Yeah, I can remember it. And in a sense, it's okay, but it's nothing that can sustain you. It's nice to remember, it's nice to recollect. Oh yeah, you had a good time, you made progress or whatever. But then that's it. It's like memories, they're not really, they're not really food that has any sustenance. Yeah? And the same with the future. The future is like, who knows? Yeah? We asked Buddha asked the monks once, how often they practice the contemplation of death. And and then the first monk said, I do it at least 3 times a day, morning, evening, morning, afternoon, evening. I said, Buddha, that's not good enough. The other one said, well, I try to remember. Anyway, so they gave a few answers, and the Buddha said, nah, it's not good enough. Breathing in, not breathing out, you're dead. Breathing out, not breathing in, you're dead. So there you are. See, you can contemplate death with every in and out breath. And in fact, it was quite interesting to me when I read that first, because the Buddha is actually saying, while you are breathing in, you should reflect, oh, may I still be able to experience the next out breath, for that will be so that I can practice, which will be for my long-term benefit and happiness. And while you're breathing out, you should reflect, oh, may I be able to still experience the next in-breath, for that will be for my benefit and happiness. Yeah. And when I first read it, I thought, hang on, if I'm breathing in and I think about the out-breath, I'm not in the present moment, right? I'm actually in the future. And so, but because I had faith and I trusted in what the Buddha said, I tried it out. And it was quite amazing, because while you're breathing in, to bring up even the possibility that you might not experience the next out-breath brings you even more into the present moment, which means you get more appreciation for the in-breath you have right now if you consider the possibility that the next out-breath is not going to happen. So I just said, sadhu, this is brilliant. The Buddha was really, that's the thing about the Buddha. He knows what he's talking about. So it really works. So you can try that out. And it makes you appreciate the in-breath if you take into consideration you may never breathe out. Makes you appreciate the out-breath when you consider it might never breathe in again. So this is what the future is. It's just a fantasy. It's not something that, admittedly, yes, that we have to sometimes make certain plans. Currently, I'm sort of trying to get my head around my next trip to Asia, because I've been invited to go back to Australia after 20 years. And, I don't know, don't know how am I going to fit it all in, because these monks are not going to be there then, and they're going to be somewhere else. And then I've got this retreat in Kuala Lumpur, and I got to go to Singapore, and then 15th of February, I have to be in Thailand. There's this inauguration of this cherry. And so, yes, there are these considerations, or these plans, or these things that we have to do. But that's what a skilled so-called multitasker does, isn't it? It's like multitasking is actually single tasking in reality, if you think about it. If you think multitasking is that you can do different things at the same time, you're wrong. You're just going to screw yourself up. Yeah. What a multitasker really is, he's 100% in the present moment with this task, but then he can switch and he'll be 100% with that task he does then. And then he switches back, or he might even switch between 3 or 4 things. But if you do one thing and you think about another, that's it, you're dead, you're finished. You can't do it. So that skill is one that's really worth developing, being able to, whatever you do, if you have to make a plan for a future journey or for work or for what have you, by all means, do that. But don't obsess over it. And once it's done, it's finished. And then you do the next thing. You don't go back. You don't think about it anymore. You gotta be able to put things down. You gotta be able to let things go. Knowing that obsessing over it and worrying over it and letting it just mull over again and again and again in the mind, it's just tiring. It's just a waste of time, and it's costing a lot of energy. Thinking is really costing you energy. And the more we think every day, the more we find that we'll be very tired in the evening. In fact, one of the benefits the Buddha says of sense restraint, which always sounds so terrible to most lay people. Oh, I want to restrain my senses. I want to indulge my senses. I want to have experiences and whatever. Yeah. But restraint means that you're actually guarding, you're protecting your mind from unnecessarily contact. Yeah. One of the pilgrimages I remember I went on to India, because India is such a fascinating country, because it's not really another country, it's another planet, isn't it? I mean, any of you who've been on a pilgrimage to India know that it's not quite of this world, is it? I mean, especially if you go to Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, where the holy places are, they're two poorest states in the whole of India. It's a different planet. It's a different sphere, really. So you go there and you see all these fascinating, you've got all these fascinating impressions that it boggles the mind. So we were sitting in this bus, cruising for like 13 hours because it takes forever to get from A to B in India, because you got cows and elephants and rickshaws and what have you in the streets. And before you get somewhere, 10 kilometers takes you like, I don't know, 10 hours or something like that. Not quite. But anyway, every journey is a long journey. So there's this one lady, she's quite old, and she got onto the pilgrimage. And I said to her, I said, Margaret, make sure that, when we sit on the bus, there's all these fascinating things outside that you can watch along the road. Yeah. But I guarantee you, if you just keep looking out the window all day long on this bus tour, you're going to be completely wiped when we get there in the evening. And she sort of nodded and said, yes. And then as we were driving, it's just the way the light played, I could see the reflection of her face in the window behind, because she was sitting behind me. And I could see her move like that. The eyes were moving, the head was moving, and she was just scanning and sucking in every single impression along the road. And by the time we got, can't remember where we went in the evening, she just came to me and said, I'm really exhausted. I told you so. So sense restraint is just protecting ourselves from unnecessary input. And that goes for thoughts as well. We don't need to believe every thought. It actually comes from a lot of wisdom if we can recognize a thought as unnecessary, or as even stupid, or as unwholesome or unproductive. Because once we recognize it, at least we can pull away from it. We can no longer pay it attention. But the higher school really is to recognize a thought as a thought, any thought, even the good ones. So in meditation, be very careful of the good thoughts. So you all know that you're not supposed to think bad thoughts, but I'll advise you to also be very wary of the good thoughts, because that's what Mara does, is he comes in and he gives you all these great thoughts of wisdom, so this is really good stuff to think about, here, come on, bit more. And you're still thinking about it. And before you know it, you're miles away from your breath, from your meditation object, because you bought into it again and again and again and again. So in the end, in meditation, you just have to recognize a thought as a formation, as a condition, as something that has arisen because of causes, but it's not something that you need to pursue. It's not something that is yours. Because if it really was yours, let's be honest, you could just tell it to go away. You can't. If it was really yours, you had control over it, but you don't. So where's that illusion of self? Where's that self? My thoughts, my feelings, my perceptions, my memories. They come and go according to conditions. There's very little you can do about it. So that's wisdom when you recognize that, because then, with mindfulness and wisdom, you have the strength to just, like I said, to take away your interest. So, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. You go back to your meditation object. Now is good. Now is good. Now is good. Now there's nothing. Now there's just this body sitting here, this mind knowing that you're sitting here. There's this breath breathing, there's the mind knowing that you're breathing. So you got the mind knowing, and you got these things arising in consciousness. They're arising in the knowing. You hear something, you know. Or rather, the ear hears something, the mind knows. The body Experience is a sensation, the mind knows. It's always the mind that knows. So see if you can separate the knowing from the known. That's the way out. Separate the knowing from the known. The known is just conditions. But the knowing is always there. When you're depressed, you know. When you're happy, you know. When you're bored, you know. When you're tired, you know. So that knowing is really your gateway to Nibbana. It's your gateway to peace. But you need to put that knowing onto one thing, first of all. I said that in another talk. I said one of the Kubachans in Thailand, Tanpoli, is supposed to be a rebirth of King Asoka from the time after the time of the Buddha. That's why its monastery is called Wat Asokaram. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. Can't verify. I don't have psychic powers, but that's the story. Anyway, he was one of the few monks from the Thai forest tradition who actually went to India on foot from Thailand. And he lived with these Hindu sadhus for a long time, and they were into these chakras, these energy centers in the body. And he was teaching some quite interesting meditation, which I adopted for myself. But one of the things he said, meditation fundamentally, or principally, is from many to two, from two to one, from one to zero. Yeah? Or as one of the things that I appreciated from Ajahn Brahm, that was one of his favorite lines as well, and I loved it straight away when I first read it, Sabbe Sankhara Samatha, the stilling of all formations. It's the calming of all conditions. Because Nibbana is supposed to be the unconditioned, isn't it? It's supposed to be the unborn, the unconditioned, the unformed, the unbecome. Yeah? So the Buddha once said is that if it wasn't possible, if it was not possible, if there was no unborn, uncreated, unformed, unmade, or whatever the fourth one is, then there would be no escape from the born, from the created, from the formed, from the become. But because there is the unborn, the uncreated, the unformed, the unbecome, that's why there is an escape from the born, created, formed, and become. So many is like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. That's many. Yeah? Two is when the knowing knows one thing. When the mind knows the breath. It doesn't control the breath. So when you watch your breath later on in the meditation, don't try and control it. We're not doing pranayama here. We just want to know whether we're breathing in. We want to know whether we're breathing out. How do we know whether we're breathing in? How do we know when we're breathing out? Is it just the physical sensation of the breath touching your nose? Or physical sensation in your heart when you're breathing in? Or wherever you perceive the breath in the body? Because the breath, remember, is the wind element. It's oxygen. It's something that is actually manifest in the whole body. You can technically watch your breath anywhere in the body. No, it's not. Even if the breath is so subtle that there's no physical manifestation of the wind element going in and out, you still know whether you're breathing out. You still know whether you're breathing in. That's the mind, that's the knowing. So, from many things to know to two. One is the mind, one is the object. That's already pretty cool when you get there, because everything else has disappeared and there's just the mind knowing the breath. It's actually quite nice. And eventually the mind begins to know itself, and the breath fades away. Because the breath becomes so subtle that the quality of knowing becomes more prominent in your experience than the experience of breath. And that's when the mind, as it were, turns around and sees itself. So the mind knowing the mind, that's one. That's oneness, that's unity, that's samadhi, collectedness, whatever you want to call it. Concentration, if you like. I'm German, I don't like that word. It's a concentration camp here. So, so, but then what's zero? Yeah, from one to zero. Zero is when that one who knows disappears. Because even with that knowing, when everything else has disappeared, there's still the illusion of self. I am the one who knows. It's my knowing, my wonderful, blissful, bright knowing. That's still delusion. So zero means you give up that illusion of self because you realize even the knowing doesn't belong to you. And that's liberation. It's the liberated knowing, the liberation of the mind, the liberation of the heart, the liberation of consciousness, whatever you want to call it. It's the equivalent to Nibbana. And we can experience that here and now with these five aggregates still there. And they call it 𝑠a-upadhisesa Nibbana. It's the Nibbana with remainder. And you can experience it's the same thing when the body and the khandhas finally fall away. So the experience of Nibbana, once it's attained, is constant. And it doesn't care about the remainder, which is the five aggregates. So that's why in the Theravada, some of these great monks and nuns at the time of the Buddha, they said, whether I live or die doesn't make a difference. Because an arhat doesn't die. It never ever once in the suttas says, oh, this and that arhat has died. They call it, he put down the body. That's what they do, mindfully. Because they got nothing to do with it anymore. It's not their body. It's not their feeling, not their perception, not their thoughts. They're still there. The conditions are still the same. An arhat still has to have the intention to eat if he wants to not starve. He still has to have the intention to go to the toilet. Still have to have the intention to walk from A to B. But it's no longer cetana in the sense of food that points to a self. You don't no longer do it for yourself. It's no longer an I that needs to do it. It's just because five aggregates, they need to be sustained, so you eat. But it's no longer a self. So that's what we're aiming for. We might not get there in this lifetime, but to understand what Nibbana is liberation, is freedom, is the end of coming and going, the end of running around, the end of having to get up in the morning and go to school and do all these things, go to work. Mot Ruang, finished. So we train that knowing, first of all, with mindfully being aware of the present moment, being aware of this experience right now. And we take it in, appreciate it, accept it for what it is. Like I said, if you sit down and you don't like that your knees hurt, you don't like that your back hurts, and you don't like that your saliva you have to swallow and your eyes tear up and your nose itches and whatnot, you're complaining about all these things. Nah, it's okay. This body is just what it is. Yeah, it's conditioned, it's informed, it's created, it's been born. What do I expect? It's just what bodies do. They itch. It need to be moved from A to B. So you sit down and you make a determination. So I'm going to accept this body with all its funny manifestations as it is. Going to accept this mind with all its stupid thoughts, but you're not indulging the thoughts. You're not trying to push them away. You're not trying to entertain them. When you recognize them for what they are, they're just formations, arisen. I got the legitimacy to be here. Can't change them. But you're not paying attention to them. You put your attention somewhere else. You move your interest somewhere else. You find something beautiful to hold on to, and there you go from many to two. You got one object that you pay attention to. You make that the most beautiful thing in the world. Make that the most important thing in the world. Huh? And once the mind recognizes it, that it's actually quite cool to not be messing around in the past and the future and think about this and that and the other. Because the mind is also fundamentally conditioned, then it actually inclines there with time by itself. It wants to go to peace. It wants to not pay attention to superfluous thoughts or silly feelings in the body. Like I said, what you pay attention to will grow. So if you keep paying attention to your pain in the body, that pain will keep manifesting itself. You keep paying attention to an itch, it'll itch even more. If you stop paying attention to it, the way that perception works, and you have to experience that for yourself, that sensation literally disappears from your consciousness. It's like the alarm clock that ticks and it gets on your nerves and you want to throw it against the wall. Yeah. But if you actually long enough with that clock, you just don't hear it anymore. It just fades into, because what we perceive is change. Yeah. Yeah. What time is, there is no such thing as time. There's only change. Yeah. What we perceive as time is actually change from one thing to another. That's what we can perceive. But if there's no contrast, nothing, no background against which to see it, then that just disappears. That's just the nature of perception, nature of consciousness. So if you manage to make effort to really pay attention to your breath, you should be able to experience or you experience two things. One, the breath will, providing you don't control it, become more and more peaceful. It's like you're leaving it alone, but you're still paying attention to it. Yeah? If you try to make the breath peaceful, you're just stomping around on it and trying to squish it and make it peaceful. It's not going to work. It's going to get coarser and coarser. But if you allow the breath to just breathe on its own, which it always does anyway, yeah, but you keep paying attention to it, then it'll get more peaceful. And two, what happens if you pay attention to the breath like that, mindfulness will grow, yeah, and that breath will start to change. It changes in ways that are actually quite unexpected, yeah? Because we're used to just this breath going in and out, boring. Why bother? Yeah. But once you actually pay attention to it, the breath manifests itself in actually quite beautiful ways. And like I said, because the breath is the wind element, is the air element, it's oxygen, it's something that we can perceive throughout the body. That breath energy, or in the chi, if you like, is something that we can perceive in the whole body. So sometimes you can actually perceive the breath as light in the whole body. You can perceive the breath as something that is part of nature. One of my favorite suttas, the Buddha says, the wind element internally and the wind element externally is just the wind element. So sometimes when I sit there in this apartment I'm staying right now, it's on the third floor, it's quite windy, quite a lot of nice breeze this time of year. Yeah? And so you're paying attention to the breeze outside, and then you pay attention to the breath inside, and you realize that the wind element out there and the wind element in here is just the wind element. It's not me, not mine, not a self. It's just nature. So you see nature, you see something that is not yours. And because it's not yours, it can actually be what it is. Because you stop controlling it. You stop trying to make it into something that it isn't. But it can still be your anchor to ground you in the present moment. Because that was what we need. We need to have something to hold on to. This two, from many to two, is very important. We need to go through that stage. Otherwise, we can't get to one. If you have many things going on in the mind, many things you know, you can't go from many to one. You got to go from many to two. You have to have something that grounds you in the present moment. For the other things to be able to just fade into the background, you got to have one thing that you make important, that can grow in consciousness, and that actually takes you to the point where the mind turns around and begins to know itself. Mind knowing the mind, the heart knowing the heart, consciousness knowing consciousness, the knowing knowing the knowing. So for now, because it says sitting and walking meditation, I'm supposed to say a little bit about walking meditation, I suppose. Is there any, I don't know what you're going to do or where you're going to walk. Walk on the spot or something, I don't know. But but just to give you an idea that the principle of walking meditation is the same as the principle of sitting meditation. You give it an object, the mind, and that's it. But there's so many different techniques with regard to walking meditation. So I'm just going to tell you mine, and then you can, whatever, try it out or go back to what you've learned before. For me, I found out the legs, they know what they're doing. The feet, they know how to walk. So I don't pay attention to my feet. I don't pay attention to my legs. So for me, because I learned breath meditation right from the beginning, I find it almost impossible not to pay attention to the breath. So rather than trying to go against that natural inclination of the mind wanting to be with the in and out breathing, even during walking, I kind of succumb to that, I surrender to that. So for me, the in and out breathing is still present when I walk. But because watching the breath during walking, it's quite subtle, so doesn't always lend itself so nicely. So I use my mantra with, in conjunction with the breath while I'm walking. So having obviously been trained in the Thai forest tradition and having faith in the Buddha, that I always found that mantra Buddho right quite appealing, of being the one who knows, or the knowing. So it being two syllables, like many other two-syllable words, it lends itself to use in conjunction with your in and out breathing. But even when you're sitting and you're using a meditation object like that, like the breath with a mantra, make sure that you don't use the mantra to force the breath in and out. Use the mantra only to remember that you're breathing in, you remember that you're breathing out. You know that you're breathing in, Bud. You know that you're breathing out, To. Bud, To. So you don't go Bud, To. And use the mantra to push the breath in and out, because then you're controlling, manipulating the breath, and that's exactly what you don't want to do. So you wait until the natural breath comes in, and then mindfully you recite inside Bud. Then you watch the breath going in. Once you know the breath's going out, To. Or if the mind is really distracted, you can actually drag the first and the second syllable as long as the in and out breath goes. But again, without trying to extend or manipulate the breath. It's just you repeating that first and second syllable along with the in-breath. So if the breath goes in, it's quite long, it goes boo, to. Because if you drag the mantra as long as the in-breath and as long as the out-breath, then there's less chance for other thoughts to come in. So you got one thought, Butto, but you drag that as long as the breath is. But in the end, when mindfulness is quite strong, all you need that Butto for is just to remind you at the beginning of the in-breath, aha, But, I'm breathing in. Beginning of the out-breath, To, aha, I'm breathing out. But, To. And then you watch the breath. And eventually, you drop the mantra. You stay with the breath if you've got enough mindfulness. You don't need it anymore. And that's the same I do with walking meditation. So I watch my breath in the heart. I like to watch it in my heart. That's my preferred physical place where I watch the in and out breath. I can feel it quite nicely there. So breathing in, but breathing out, To, I walk. And it does coincide with a certain number of steps, yes, but you don't pay attention to that. Because the thing is, Ajahn Brahm once he laughed, he cracked up, and I told him, I'm watching my feet, and I'm watching the Butto, and I'm watching the breath, and he just said, no wonder you're not getting peaceful. You got too many things going on. You have three meditation objects. You got your feet, you got your Butto, and you got your breath. How are you going to get peaceful? You need one. From many to two to one. So that's when I drop it, knowing, however, that eventually the mantra also with walking meditation needs to disappear once it wants to get really peaceful. You just know the breath going in, you know the breath going out. So with walking meditation, you pick a pace, a path, and traditionally it's somewhere between 22, 23, and 30 steps. And then you walk up. Some people stop at the end, reflect, bring back their mindfulness, then turn around and walk back. I usually walk up, turn around, and then stop, bring my mindfulness back up, and then walk back. Turn around, stop, walk back. So it's basically the same principle. You're just trying to find one thing that you're paying attention to, the present moment. And there's other techniques that you can use. If they work for you, that's fine. So it's getting close to 10:30. Anything important I forgot? Anything you want me to, anything worth mentioning? See, that's the thing with a one-day retreat. It's like you can't really start with all the preliminaries. Basically, you're jumping in the deep end here. But yeah, hopefully I gave a fair introduction there as to what you're supposed to do. Remember that joy and happiness is what we're looking for. So find a way to be content. Contentment's for me always been one of the keys to get into meditation. You got to accept, like I said, this present moment as it is. You be content with that. And once you're content with that, the mind can actually settle down. And then even the disturbing aspects, they're still there because the body is always demanding attention. But because you're not paying attention to it, because you're choosing not to get annoyed, because you're accepting it, because you're developing contentment, deliberately developing contentment, that a sense of ease can actually arise. A sense of peace and contentment can arise. And that allows the mind to just settle down. And then it becomes more easy to watch your meditation object. And like I said, is choose a meditation object that you enjoy, something that you like. I love the breath. That's for me. It's a beautiful object. And like I said, if with mindfulness and wisdom you're looking at it, it changes in fascinating ways. But you got to really pay attention to it. It's like perception is it's almost perverse, because what perception really is just memorize. It's just memory. We memorize something. This is yellow, this is red, this is blue, this is green, this is a house, this is a car, this is a dog, this is Mr. Smith. It's like your English teaching book. And then you see red and you think you know. You see yellow and you think you know. You see a house and you think you know. You see a dog and you think you know. Because you're just superimposing that superficial memory of what this is supposed to be on top of your experience, but you're not actually seeing what's really there. It's like, it just comes to mind. I remember when I wanted to be an art student in 𝐸𝒂𝒓𝒔𝒕𝒂𝒏𝒄 was still in Düsseldorf at the time in Germany. He's quite a famous artist, and he was teaching courses. So when I went to Thailand, I was actually going to do a portfolio and go back and study free art, and I never did. Never went back for 7 years. Became a monk. But anyway, it was an artist. I think it was Richter. Richter, I think you pronounce it, Richter. And this guy, he painted a cow, just a cow, a simple picture of a cow, nothing special. And then what did he do? He wrote cow on the cow. And that was supposed to be art. Well, at the time, it just didn't mean very much. I just kind of brushed it off. But later on, when I learned about perception, I got what he was actually aiming at, or what he was actually trying to portray or put out there to people, which is this superficiality with which we perceive our reality. We look at this and we tick it off. Aha, cow. We never actually look very deep what cow actually is. This is supposed to be wood. It's supposed to be a table. But who says it is? You go to, 200 years ago, you went to Papua New Guinea and told one of the tribal chiefs that this is supposed to be a wooden table. You just go, so what, He never heard the word table. He never even heard the word wood, maybe. So these are like learned perceptions. And so what meditation really does is it brings up the power of the mind. I always perceive the mind like light. If you have light and you bundle it, you get a laser, right? So bundled light is a laser. You bundle the laser, you can shine like kilometers. That laser. You ever seen a laser show? Yeah, I'm sure. But it's like the same with a simple torch. You have these two settings. One is like wide, one is focused. If you have the wide one, it gives you a night-wise beam, but you can't look very far. If you turn it the other way around, you can see 100, 200 meters ahead when if it's a good torch. And so the mind is always distracted, is always distracted through this multitude, through this diversity of having too many things. So the mind can never really focus. But once you focus the energy, first of all on one object, and then on itself, you can blow up the world with that mind. I mean, it's incredible power to store that mind. All the stuff you read in the suttas, I mean, it's not fairy tales. I mean, I've known monks who remember their past lives. I mean, the Buddha recollected 91 eons. You know what an eon is? It's a time from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch. It's a time from the beginning of the expansion of the universe until the universe starts contracting and falls in on itself. That's one eon. You know how long that is? And the Buddha recollected 91. Now you can brush that off as a fairy tale and say, yeah, who doesn't believe it may still go to heaven, or something like that. But if you have faith that that's actually possible, you get an inkling of what the mind can actually do. Reading people's minds. I lived with Kuba-Achans who could read my mind, and they showed me on several occasions, to my embarrassment. Yeah. So I have no doubt that all that stuff's possible. Yeah. But that mind needs to be trained. The Buddha said there's nothing more painful, there's no more suffering than the untrained mind. And he said there's no greater happiness than the well-trained mind. So training that mind, first of all, begin to know itself, then we can actually use it and apply it to whatever we want. Because then we have it in our grasp, then we can actually use it for our benefit and for the benefit of others. But if the mind is like, you know, the mind at death, I compared it once, you know, these has balloons. You have Chinese New Year, you have balloons, right? You blow them up. Yeah. Got these air balloons, blow them up. What happens if you blow a balloon up and you don't tie a knot and you let it go? It goes, and you have no way of knowing where it ends. You have no way of knowing where it comes down. And that's the untrained mind dying. You got no way to know where you're going to go. It could be anywhere. Karma can take you anywhere. But if the mind is well trained at death, like I said, you want to die with style, die in meditation with a smile. So anyway, it's good enough for this morning instructions. Please, for those of you especially those who are new or perhaps even a bit shy, we're going to have a Q&A session later on this afternoon. So any questions that I obviously haven't answered, anything you'd like to know, you can also maybe get one of the people from the society here to put a basket out with questions, and then anybody has a question, wants to write it down, then we can have a Q&A session this afternoon. So we do an hours of sitting or walking meditation now, and then at 11:30 we have our lunch and a bit of a rest, and then I'll see if I can come up with some more input. So enjoy.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Ajahn. Okay, we will turn down the lights, and those who want to stretch a bit first and then come back. Maybe some of you can move a bit to the front so that behind there's more space. This side. This side. Yeah.
โลปารดานังดุขังโลเกปารานิเคปนังสุขังนิกิปิตวากรุงบารังอัญญังบารังอนาดิยาสมุลหังทันหังอบุลหานิจจโตปารินิพุโตติ And it's funny, I was in Perth, Ajahn Brahm was visiting, and he was giving a Dhamma talk, and I was sitting there. I was already quite peaceful and all that, and then he sort of looked at me, and he started reciting that verse. I just started blissing out, and I didn't really know why. And so sometimes it's like when you hear something like that, it's sort of probably a past life thing. Maybe I was around when that verse was recited, or anyway, I had an affinity with it. And what it means is Barahave Pancha Kanda means the khandas, the aggregates of body, feeling, perception, formations, consciousness. They are a heavy burden. Barahave Pancha Kanda. So the khandas are a heavy burden. Baraharo Japukalo, and the carrier of these burdens is the person. Baradanang Dukkang Loke, taking them up in the world is suffering, or taking them up is suffering in the world, depending on how you want to see it. Baranikepanang Sukhang, putting down that burden is happiness. And then having put down this burden without taking up another burden, one is hungerless, one attains nibbana without hunger, no longer hungering after anything or for anything. And so I just wanted to start this afternoon's talk off by pointing out that one of the jobs that we have as practitioners is to recognize burdens as burdens. The problem is oftentimes we carry these burdens around without even knowing it. And we're quite willing to pick up new burdens all the time. So we burden ourselves down, and then we wonder why we end up in a burnout clinic. So these burdens, they are of a great variety, and we have to recognize them. Obviously, we can't by willpower put down the 5 aggregates. It doesn't work that way. It'd be nice if it was, but it doesn't work that way. But we recognize the burden as a burden, and then we strive to do something about that. And certainly when there's a choice, we don't pick up burdens. One of the reasons in the Metta Sutta, I slightly modified that formerly English translation of it, because what it really means is having few duties, rather than the old translation was being unburdened by duties. So the Buddha literally said we should have few duties. And sometimes people think that's in contradiction to where the Buddha says that we are supposed to be very circumspect and carry out our duties with due diligence and proper effort. So whatever duties we have, whatever burdens we have, because a duty is a burden, isn't it? There's no way around it. But then there are burdens, or rather duties, that we do take on. If I get married, I have a wife. So she is my burden, and I am her burden. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And it's okay. I mean, that's a deal we make. We make a commitment, ideally for life, even though that rarely happens anymore these days. People get divorced for the slightest little hiccups. But anyway, so you take on this burden, and then you do your due diligence, you do your duty towards your wife, and as a wife you do your duty towards your husband. And it's like, if you look in history, I mean, there are so many wonderful customs and ways of doing things that have been carried down to us through the ages that used to work for centuries. And now they want to just throw it all out. They think they're smarter. The reason my parents have never divorced is because they just did their duties. These days, if you you try to point out the duties of a wife to a husband, you're likely to get I don't know, flogged or something like that. It's a, I mean, the whole idea about equality, I'm digressing a bit. That's actually not what I was going to talk about, but that's what happens when you don't prepare anything and things just come out. It's like it works. These old-fashioned things actually work. The reason they work is because the whole idea in modern society of equality is a lot of nonsense. A man is not equal to a woman is not equal to a man. They're completely different. I can't get kids. I don't have a womb, for instance. I don't have those nurturing qualities. Now, all the kind of rainbow stuff that goes on in the world, you don't know whether you're a girl or a boy. Well, look down and you see what you are. It's very simple. But mentally, you may feel differently. So now you have all these ideas of, whatever sex changes and goodness knows what else, and you get pumped full of hormones as a 30-year-old, you go through puberty again. I've seen people like that, and it's a lot of suffering. And it's because mentally the karma is such that they don't feel at home necessarily in that body. But that's a karmic thing. But what I was really trying to say with this equality is that we have different potentials, we have different properties. We're not the same, male and female, and so it's quite all right then to allocate certain duties to the female and certain duties to the male, and that used to work for centuries. And you try to throw it all out and find something better. Well, good luck. Maybe you're lucky, maybe not. But whichever way we look at it, when we decide to go against nature, go against things that are obviously made by nature like that, then it can turn out to be a problem. So, but going back to this point of burdens, it's like it's not just the burden of a wife to a husband or the duties, but it's many other duties that we take on. As a monk, I'm happy to be here now and try my best to give a decent Dhamma talk. But if I don't have to, I don't crave for that. So it's like when I'm in the monastery and I walk to the central area and I see people walking around, tourists or whatever, I just run like a deer. I'm not an entertainer. I'm not approaching them to entertain them, because I prefer my solitude. I like to be alone. I like to be having that time for myself. But then when it's time to come out, and when there is people coming to the monastery out of faith to offer food, then I'm more than happy to talk to them after the meal, within moderation. It's like I usually give them an hour after the meal, and then I tell them to get lost. So I can go back to my hut. And it might sound funny or strange or something, but just think about it. It's like, now, how many times do we feel obliged to take on something that we deep down know, boy, if I take that on, maybe it's a bit much, you know? So, we need to find that space. We need to make that space for ourselves. I know most people in Singapore who have a job. It's usually a pretty high-stress job. They work many hours. But then you also need your recreation. You need your break. There's no no wonder that there's a lot being done for recreational places. And went for a long walk from the barrage all the way through the gardens by the bay, along the river one side, back on the other side, through the casino around the bay, to our favorite coffee shop the other night. It's about an hour and a half walk. You see a lot of people jogging, exercising, and that's important, is to find that time, to make that time. But because this is supposed to be a meditation retreat, we have to look at the burdens that we encounter when we look into our hearts. When we close our eyes, we encounter these things that come to disturb us. Or really, we're disturbing them by paying attention to them. If we didn't pay attention to the thoughts, we didn't pay attention to the feelings, to the emotions, to the memories, to the fantasies, they would have no chance in the world to stay, because they need our food. We are feeding them. So if we get that point, then whenever something comes up, like I said this morning, not with aversion, pushing it away, nor sort of, oh, this is an interesting one, I should be thinking about that. Maybe I get enlightened when I figure this one out. No, you can't get enlightened through thinking. It doesn't work that way. Thought is always, at best, a bad description of reality. It's never really, you never really can get anything new, because thoughts are made up of memories from the past. So you can't think your way into the Dhamma. You have to let it all go and allow the mind to go silent. And in that silence, things can emerge. So when we look at the mind and we encounter these famous, five hindrances, for instance, traditionally you have sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and the last one is doubt. Someone asking the other day about doubt, and I said it's doubt with regard to what is wholesome and unwholesome. It's not doubt about the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or doubt about yourself. It's doubt about what's right and what's wrong. Because vicikicca is not something that only Buddhists have. Christians have it, Muslims have it, they all have it. So if it was to do with Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, a kind of doubt, then Christians would be well off, because they don't have that. They don't have anything to do with the Buddha. So it's doubt with regard to what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is good and what is bad. So that's where the doubts are. And then this terrible restlessness and worry. And the Buddha gives these great similes with regard to the doubt. He says it's like being lost in the desert. You don't know whether you're going north, east, south, west. You've got no clue where you are. You have no clue where you're going. Basically, you don't have a map. You don't have a compass. You don't know what's right and you don't know what's wrong. So you can't follow a decent path. Restlessness and remorse. Like restlessness, the Buddha says, is like being a slave. You're always being told what to do. Do this, do that, think about this, think about that, remember this, plan that. So being a slave Restlessness is interesting, because restlessness is one of the last fetters that we actually abandon before becoming an arhat. So on the very, very, very subtle level, there's still restlessness. I'll talk about that later, be a bit much now. But anyway, so that sloth and torpor is the imprisonment. You're locked in prison, Buddha says. You're sitting there. This morning I noticed in my meditation, there was a few times I started nodding off. But I know how to fight it. I fight against it because I don't like it. I don't like that state of drowsiness. So I can see it coming. And then the body kind of slumps down a little bit and you fight, you go against it. No, no, no. And if you do that long enough, to be your surprise, all of a sudden you realize, because you're putting energy into it, that the energy actually helps to create energy. I was telling people I had this funny mantra I used to use when I said meditation. I said, energy comes from energy, 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 comes from energy. Because if you put forth effort, you get energy. So if you fight that sloth and torpor, eventually you push through it, and then the mind becomes bright. So in the meditation, and these are all burdens, heavy burdens, these hindrances. The Buddha says they obstruct not only calm and peace, but they also obstruct wisdom. Yeah? And then, of course, the first one, liking and disliking, or sensual desire and ill will, it's basically those two. Because we're so used to want something and not want something else, that habit of liking and disliking, craving for something that you want or pushing away something you don't want, that's the one that's going on in our mind constantly, 24 hours a day. There's always something you like, something you don't like. You want something you want to see, something you don't want to see. Every move we make with the body is basically moving away from some irritation in the hope of finding some comfort in the body where you can stay. And then you find you can sit like that for 5 minutes and you have to move again. The body is never comfortable. So we have to just leave it alone. You have to just sit it down, feed it, wash it, give it something to drink, and sit it down, and then tell it to shut up and don't pay any attention to it. And it's true. If you ignore it, it stops bothering you. It's a fact. You just have to try it. You have to actually experience it. If you, like I said this morning, if you choose to take away your interest from those physical discomforts and you put your attention on something else, by putting the attention on something else, that thing can grow in your mind and expand and become the predominant object of your awareness. And these other things fade into the background. And it's like that with the body. And there's a stage in the meditation the Buddha called passaddhi, which is literally called kaya passaddhi usually, which means the stilling, the calming of the body, which means the whole metabolism goes down, and there's this enormous sense of relief of a burden, the burden of the body being constantly under tension. Yeah, we're literally constantly under tension. And it's only when that stage in the meditation is reached that the body completely relaxes. And have you ever seen somebody sitting in real samadhi, like someone who's been sitting in real samadhi? They look like a statue. There's no tension, they're completely still, like a statue, completely relaxed. And it's a really wonderful experience to have that, because then the burden of the body is finally gone. So this aversion, of course, the Buddha then compares to what does he call it? A disease? Yeah? It's a sickness. Aversion, anger, hatred is a disease. It's an illness, it's a sickness. And the desire is being in debt. That's my favorite. I like that. Because whatever pleasures we take or partake of, there's always a price to pay. You don't get nothing for free. And in my kuti, I have a, you still know what a coaster is? You put your beer glass on? Yeah. So when you go to a pub, in my days anyway, you go to a pub, if you know the barkeeper well, you can keep drinking and he'll just take his pencil and you make another line on your coaster. And then in the evening before you go with the coaster and you pay however many beers you had. And if you know the barkeeper really well, you can say, leave it till next week, And he puts the coaster into a shelf. And if you know him really well, you can do that for a while. But eventually he's going to come and say, hey, cash, give me all your money. You still owe me. So it's like there's this debt that we have to pay. We pay with sickness for health, we pay with old age for youth, we pay with death for life. It's just a fact. But even in between, when these heavy things don't necessarily happen yet, we feel that there's always a price to pay. So the sensual world is not giving us nothing for free. It doesn't work that way. And that's one of the other things where you realize this dropping away of a burden is when you sit in meditation and there is no sensual desire, there's no aversion. You realize, hey, this is free. This is free. I don't have to pay for this. This is for nothing, And it's wonderful. It's a happiness that doesn't cost. A happiness that comes from within. It's a happiness that is not dependent on conditions. It's not dependent on external circumstances, on the goodness or the kindness of other people. It doesn't depend on the government, the weather. It doesn't depend on anything. Well, it's not quite true. It's also dependent. It's dependent on wholesome mind states. When I first read the description that Buddha gives about samadhi, I was really disappointed because it doesn't really seem to say very much there. What is it? 𝐼𝒏𝒅𝒓𝒔𝒕𝒂𝒏𝒅𝒊𝒏𝒈. So giving up sensuality, vivicca akusalehi dhammehi, which is like unwholesome mind, giving up unwholesome mind states, he enters into the first jhana. Oh, great. It sounds easy, doesn't it? Yeah. All you have to do is give up sensuality, give up wholesome mind states, and there you are, first jhana, great. Been trying for a while. So that's because we don't really understand what it means. It's like, because sensuality or this craving, it's not just for strong sense contact, sexual, food, what have you, but it's just the desire for comfort, the desire for just a sense of being at ease. We're looking for happiness in a place where it can't be found. That's the problem. And it takes that realization. And that's why we are supposed to do these reflections on, body contemplation and contemplation on death, all these things that we don't really want to do because they don't seem all that great. And who wants to think about death? Who wants to think about the body just being the four elements or being made up of these funny looking organs and all this slime and stuff that's in there? You don't want to really contemplate that. But I found the neutral approach the best for me. It's like the elements have always done it for me. And that's why when I do the breath meditation, the point I realize, or the mind realizes, that the breath is just a wind element. It's like the mind lets go of its hold, or its attempt to hold it. And then the breath is free. The breath is truly like the wind in the trees. And you can just watch it. Until we realize that point, until we realize the breath is kaya sankhara, is the bodily formation, is that which keeps the body going. Until we realize that and let it go, let it just be according to its nature, and we're always fumbling around with the breath, and then it can never become peaceful. But once you realize that, now you see the breath is just the wind element. And as such, it's representative of the body. Like I said this morning, half joking, you breathe in, you don't breathe out, you're dead. That's it. So in a sense, the breath is representative of all the other elements, earth, water, fire. Because like I said the other day to someone here, once you see one, you see them all. Once you understand the wind element as the wind element, by implication, you understand the other three. And that's how insight works. It's like you look deep, you see deeply into one thing, then it reveals the truth. Because it's not the truth about one thing, it's the truth about everything. Because these characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta, they're universal. The Buddha said, well, if there was anything permanent in these five aggregates and these heavy burdens, then I wouldn't be teaching you to get rid of them or to let them go. But there isn't. So we can contemplate like that. And then we don't really need to push and pull so much. We can just observe, we can just watch, we can look into what we are experiencing with a bit more a sense of aloofness. It's not so close to home anymore. It's just nature playing out its game. They asked me for you remember that old biodata I submitted when they asked me that? It's years and years ago, 20 years ago, so they asked me for biodata. First of all, I didn't know what a biodata is. So it's supposed to be a biography, short biography of myself. They wanted to put on one of these pamphlets. So I composed a little poem and I sent it back to them. And it's like, I don't know if I can remember it. What's there to life? It's nature's play, just eating and excreting, while getting older day by day. Life's pleasures all are fleeting. So I think it was Angie in those days, and she wrote back, "Oh, you can't really put that on." Well, but yeah, see when we do we got another hour's meditation later on. So see if we can seeing a burden as a burden. Because truly, if we truly see it as a burden, already it starts falling away, it drops away. Yeah? If it doesn't drop away, it means we haven't seen it as a burden. We're still holding on to it. Yeah? And there's these days there's so much talk. I mean, it used to be for a while now, but talk about samatha and vipassana, and all this vipassana stuff. They call it insight meditation. Yeah, as if you could somehow do insight. Now, insight is something that happens as a result of seeing something clearly. And so we practice the Eightfold Path properly, the way the Buddha taught, and then as a result we realize something, and then the result of realizing something as a burden, in this case, or as suffering, is the mind lets it go. The mind shrinks away. There's this simile the Buddha gives where he says it's like when you take a cock's feather or a piece of bowstring and you bring it, say this was a flame, you bring the cock's feather towards the flame. What does it do? It shrivels away, doesn't it? It shrinks up, it shrivels up. Or the bowstring, it shrivels up. Yeah? And it's like the mind retreats. It retreats from that which it knows as a burden. So once you see a burden as a burden, that's actually seeing. That's called dasana. Remember the idea of becoming a stream enterer, for instance, is through dasana. It's through seeing. It's not through thinking. You see into something. You see the truth. It's a direct seeing. It's a direct knowledge. It's something that is unmistakable. And once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. There's still the habitual tendencies that will come up, but the nature of someone who's seen the truth is he can never forget that. He may lose his mindfulness, but whenever he catches himself, that person will know, remember. It's like imprinted in the heart. That's why traditionally, when you read it in the scriptures, that someone who actually seen the Dhamma, they can only maximum be born 7 times in good births, at least human, if not higher, until they penetrate fully to becoming an arhat, because it's something they can never lose. You can't lose it anymore. So these burdens that we carry or take on or take up, if you like, there's something that we need to recognize. Need to recognize them for what they are. And of course, the job of the defilements is to make us not see that. So there's always this struggle, isn't it? It's the Dhamma versus the world versus the Dhamma. That's why we need to keep inspiring ourselves, because the thing is, with the Dhamma, unless it's really imprinted in our hearts, we forget. And we tend to forget. We get caught up in other things, or we get lost again for a while and may even stop meditating altogether. And then after a while, we realize, oh, I strayed again pretty far from what I actually wanted to do, And you got to pull yourself back together. But that's all right. I mean, that's life. It's like it's not a path that is just straight and direct. It's got its corners and its turns and its precipices and obstacles. But at the very least, I hope all of you will have been around the Dhamma long enough to know that hey, there's not really anything else to do anyway. Everything else just goes around in circles. So staying on that path is the surest way to actually make progress, not to digress from it. And knowing it well as well. It's like these days there's so much literature on Buddhism, and so many people write books about it and give talks about it. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is appalling. I got this German magazine. I said jokingly once, I wouldn't even light a fire with it, let alone read it. Because they put stuff in there, whatever they don't believe or whatever they don't understand, they just put it down, or they mock it, or they try to explain it away. It's like we've been fortunate to have the Dhamma for over 2,500 years. I mean, how many things actually last that long in the world? It's amazing that the Dhamma is still around, 2,500 years. But of course it's declining. Of course it's declining. I was telling someone else that 95% of the monks these days use money because it's convenient. It's convenient. And it's like you got to take an interest in also looking after monks or inviting good monks, because that's where the Dhamma is sort of carried on from generation to generation. And one way of being around good monks and learning from them is by knowing how to look after them when they come to your center, and make them feel welcome, know how to, basically look after them. When you offer them a meal, you got to know how to offer a meal, how to do certain things that they need in order to preserve their rules, their Vinaya. There's a little book Ajahn Kevali wrote once. It's a Vinaya for lay people or something like that. It's quite a nice book. It gives lay people the chance to know what monks actually are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. So you can actually go and tell them off if they do something wrong. Yeah, it's perfectly all right. I give you permission hereby. Tell the monks off if they misbehave. Because if you don't, then it goes both ways, doesn't it? Yeah, it's like you don't know how they're supposed to behave, and they think you don't know, so they misbehave, and then it gets worse and worse. It's like, sort of jokingly said once that the Thais they're so kind and so fond of monks, but they rather have a bad monk than no monk to look after. And of course that's a bit questionable, isn't it? So so one of the things that I mentioned the other day is that joy is like food for the journey. So we encounter these hindrances, and then we get all depressed because mind seems to never want to sit still, or there's all desire, and there's aversion, and then there's doubt, and all these hindrances kind of passing the buck to one another and basically changing from one to another. So they seem to be always around. Like I said, they weaken our wisdom, they weaken our peace, and they're actually the fuel for delusion. The Buddha says that avijja, remember the not knowing, is always the negative, vicca is knowing, true knowledge is vicca, avijja means not knowing. And that avijja has its food as well. And the food for avijja is the five hindrances. So you can see why we need to abandon those five hindrances. Because once we have abandoned them, desire and aversion, sloth and torpor, restlessness, remorse, doubt, then the mind is actually clear. And vicca has a chance to come up. Knowledge, knowing, true seeing has a chance to come up. And then we're actually getting close to the Dhamma. So we need to do that. And one way to explain this falling away of burdens is through this joy, or piti, joy, happiness. Because once a burden truly falls away from our heart, from our mind, that brings up this joy. That brings up the happiness. And it's that happiness, it's that joy that gives us encouragement to keep going along the path. I have this dry insight worker, I think that translated it, which is supposed to be someone who practices only insight, only doesn't practice calming the mind. Never made any sense to me, but anyway. But even the word is so terrible, because who wants to be dry? Huh? It just doesn't imply any joy. It doesn't imply any happiness. So I want to be moist and wet. That's my preferred way of meditating. And that's through this joy. That's when you recognize a burden as a burden and you see it falling away. That gives you confidence. It gives you a sense of victory. So, yay, one less burden. And that brings up joy, it brings up encouragement, and we need that. We need that joy. That pushes us along. It's the glue that keeps us meditating. There's no joy in the meditation, then sooner or later, you can run on faith for a certain while, but eventually you need to see the results. You need to see the results of keeping sila by experience, non-remorse, for instance. You see that you don't have anything to worry about. You look in the mirror in the morning, you feel good about yourself because you know you're trying your best to be a good person, live a good life. And that gives you a sense of joy. That's the first kind of happiness the Buddha talks about, that is like a real happiness, one that you can actually build on. And there's the happiness that comes from what I said this morning, sense restraint, which is basically guarding, looking after your mind when sense contact happens. Because it's not, sense restraint isn't like poking out your eyes or putting wax in your ears so you don't see or hear anything. That's not sense restraint. Sense restraint means, yes, you do experience sights and sounds and smells and tastes and touches, but you guard the mind. You watch at the mind door for this liking and disliking that always pushes and pulls you around. And that's where you lose energy. It's in this liking and disliking. If you can just look on these things, or look upon them, and see them for what they are, then you're not pushed and pulled around so much. And that gives you a sense of joy. A sense of joy that comes is a sense of purity in that sense restraint. The Buddha said that the sense restraint is a prerequisite for mindfulness. Because you can see why. Because if you imagine, like, if you're constantly giving yourself all this input with all the liking and disliking that goes along with it, how can you ever maintain your awareness on an object in the present moment? Because the mind is constantly being pushed and pulled around. Like I said this morning with a lady who on the trip to India, she wanted to see it all, experience it all. But in the evening, she was really tired. But it's also it also depends on the content that we feed ourselves. If it is wholesome content, like even say me being in Singapore now for almost 10 days, and I don't know, it was some activities all the time. Either we went for walks and people ask you questions there, or you give talks, or it's been an active week. But I didn't feel exhausted, at least not mentally, because it was to do with Dhamma. It was to do with the Dhamma, and it's therefore mentally invigorating. It's energizing. Talking about Dhamma gives you energy. So if you choose that, then but even there you can overdo it. And people who feel they have to read every book on Buddhism that there is, or listen to all the talks there are. In the beginning, you might feel you need all that input, but after a while, you get a pretty good idea of what you're supposed to be doing. You just get on with it. Just find your time, make your space, and practice diligently. So now bear in mind that joy is one of the results that comes from putting down heavy burdens. When we meditate and we start looking at the breath, first of all, we know that we're breathing in. We know that we're breathing out. And it's a little bit easier than the next stage, because just to know that you're breathing in, just to know that you're breathing out, you can know at the beginning of the in-breath, and then you can think about other things. But you got to come back when the breath goes out. And then you got to know that you're breathing out. And then you can start thinking about dinner again or whatever. You come back when the breath goes in. So it's like knowing each breath at one point is, of course, much less difficult than the next stage where the Buddha says experiencing the whole body, or the whole breath, or the whole body of breath, or whichever way you want to translate it. It's people always miss the point that the breath is the body is the breath. So whether you say experiencing the whole breath, or you experiencing the whole body, or experiencing the whole breath body, it doesn't matter, because it's always one and the same. The breath is representative of the body at that stage. That's why the Buddha calls it at the end of the first tetrad in the Anapanasati Sutta. The Buddha said, what you're doing here is kayanupassana. You're practicing satipatthana on the body. Because the breath is a body among bodies. That's literally what the Buddha says. The breath is a body among bodies. That's why I call it body contemplation. So the first tetrad in the Anapanasati Sutta, which people usually say, oh, you're just practicing samatha, it's not really vipassana. You can quote the Anapanasati Sutta, and says here, first tetrad, kayanupassana, practice vipassana, you practice satipatthana, which is actually the proper practice. You don't practice vipassana, you practice satipatthana, and the result should be vipassana, the result should be insight. But that's, even at that first stage, just knowing whether you're breathing in, knowing whether you're breathing out, even at that stage, you already dropped a lot of burdens. And then when you get to the stage where you have the whole breath in mind, from the very beginning to the very end, and nothing comes in between, that should give you joy to get that stage. Because there's so many burdens you've dropped at that point. And it's such a relief. to be with just this one little breath happening right now, perfectly content, not wanting anything else. And then towards the end of the first tetrad, then the Buddha says, calming the bodily formations. And that's the first time that word formation appears, sankhara, kaya sankhara. He doesn't say calm the breath. He could have said calm the breath, because the breath is kaya sankhara, the breath is the bodily formation. But he deliberately said calming the bodily formations, which means you recognize, or you need to recognize at that point, that what you're actually aware of is a bodily formation. In other words, it's not personal, it's not yours, it's just that which keeps the body going. And then you actually find it a lot easier to let the breath just breathe without controlling it. And that's even more of a relief. There's even more of a burden dropped, because you no longer need to control the breath. The breath is just there, doing its thing. The mind is there, knowing. There's just these two realities happening parallel. That's an enormous relief. And that should give you joy. So there's joy, or the opportunity for joy, at every turn of this meditation on the breath. And even prior to that, reflecting on, if that's still difficult for you, then deliberately reflect on your other good qualities, whether it's your generosity, your virtue, your sense restraint. Now, all these things, they give opportunity if you pay attention to them properly, if you understand them properly, if you value them, if you truly value them, then that should give you joy and happiness. And then you slowly get into the vicinity of the mind, where you actually know what the mind truly is, what this quality of knowing really is. It's no longer that smorgasbord of sense impressions that demand to be known. I want to be known. No, I want to be known. Sight, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, they all want to be known. You're going to know this and know that. Jump here and jump there. Do this, do that. Restlessness. But if there's just the knowing, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then you know what you're supposed to cultivate. And then you also know what sati really is, mindfulness, or presence of mind. It's the strength of sati. It's like once a level of samadhi, a degree of samadhi is reached, I'm not even talking about jhanas. Yeah? I call it like this sphere of experience which is stable. It has that sati, that mindfulness, that presence, that present moment awareness. It has a stability. It's no longer so fickle. It's no longer so fragile. Yeah? If we practice in the beginning and we want to maintain our mindfulness, just any little thing can just throw us off the rails, throw us off guard. Any little sense impression, whoop, and all of a sudden we're thinking about this, and then we're thinking about that, and then it's a memory, and then it's the future, and then it's this, and then it's that. So we have to really struggle to maintain the mindfulness on the breath. But once the mind realizes that it's actually peaceful, it takes away the interest from these things, and it rests but with itself. then that quality of mindfulness becomes stable. You reach a sense of stability. And then within that stability, within that sphere or that space of the mind, you find you no longer need to be so careful. Things can actually arise in that experience without immediately destroying the stability. And before, it's like anything that arises, any little thought, and it's basically that the whole card house is collapsing. You start from the beginning again. But once there's a certain momentum created, a certain stability of mindfulness, you actually know what mindfulness is, and it's stable, it's strong. And then within that sphere of mindfulness, you can actually investigate. You can actually use the mind to reflect properly. Usually when we try to reflect or we try to contemplate, it's just this associative thinking. It's come from one thing to another thing to another thing, and before you know it, you don't really know what was I actually going to do here. But with the stability of sati, a stability of mindfulness, you can actually think along a thread and you actually stay on track. Thoughts don't disturb that stability anymore because they are going in a particular direction. They go along a particular thread of thought. And that's what we call vitakka vichara. This initial application of the mind and sustained application of the mind, sometimes translated as thinking and pondering, because in the outside of the meditation, yes, it is this thinking and pondering, if you like. But on that level, it's more subtle. It's not necessarily even verbal anymore. But it's a way of thinking and reflecting and contemplating where this initial and sustained application of the mind is directed and purposely purposely directed. It has a purpose and it maintains that purpose. And that's why this kind of reflection can actually lead to samadhi. It's like in these recollections that we have, the Buddhanusati, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati, what is it? Chaganusati, Silanusati, Devatanusati, all these anusati, where you reflect on the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, generosity, virtue, the devas. If you really think along that one particular line of thought, you really stay on track on, say, reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, and you don't stray, then that can actually take you to samadhi. Because it brings up joy, because it's a wholesome reflection. It's a reflection that is in line with the truth, with the Dhamma. And the mind doesn't get lost in this associative thinking, which is always jumping around and losing its purpose. So find out, what are your preferred reflections? What are the things that interest you, that you find fascinating, that bring you joy? And then don't be afraid to think about them. But make it a purposeful thinking. Make it a thinking that goes along a particular thread, that has a purpose, has a meaning. Don't be afraid of thinking. Right thought is one of the factors of the Eightfold Path. Thinking thoughts of goodwill, thoughts of compassion, thoughts of sympathetic joy, thoughts of kindness. These things, or thinking about the Buddha, Dhamma, the Sangha, generosity, virtue, even the heavenly beings. These are all thoughts that you can use. And if you can stay on track, you can actually think yourself into joy, literally. Eventually you let the thinking go. Once the joy is there, you can maintain it. It wells up from within. You don't need to fuel it anymore. but it can be used skillfully. And then whenever you see burdens cropping up, you see them for what they are. You don't push them away. You just look at the burden and see it as a burden. And you notice already there, it disappears. Once you recognize it as it is, it's gone. You go back to the breath, back to your meditation object, back to your reflection. So, I'm running out of stuff to say, but it's already 1 hour. So keep on babbling here for a while, but I think it's good enough. So whatever I haven't said yet and is interesting for you, don't be shy, put it on a piece of paper. Try to be precise, direct and short and sweet. Don't write essays. And try your best handwriting, because I'm terrible at deciphering people's handwritings. Otherwise, we need an interpreter. So hopefully an hour is going to be enough to answer all your questions this afternoon. So please enjoy the next, what is it, hour?
Thank you, Ajahn. We will dim the light.